Today we'll be changing out the brakes on all four wheels. They're all disc brakes, and we'll be changing out the rotors on the front. So first thing, always remember safety first. Always remember to put your parking block up under the rear wheels and engage the emergency brake. Alright, so let's get started. On the wheels we'll be using a 19mm deep well socket. First, loosen. Alright, I got the car jacked up, got the wheels off the ground. Time to start taking the wheels off. Before compressing the brakes like we're about to do, it's always important to make sure you got the cap of the brake fluid off, as you see right there, so that you're not creating undue pressure in the system. So when you tighten these calipers and push the brake pads back out, you don't blow a brake line. So pulling the cap off, make sure that there's ample space for the brake fluid to get pushed back up into the reservoir so that you don't have this problem. So so here's the kicker. The rotor comes off with a T40 bolt. The rotor comes off with a T40 hex head. I haven't read or seen anything that says this is an easy job. Most people say they have to drill it out. So I'm going to spray some anti-seize on it, and hopefully I'm going to spray some anti-seize on it, let it sit for a second. off so easy, I might put it back on. Just so it can do what it's supposed to do. Just keep the wheel. Alright, here what you see me doing is I'm putting a C-clamp on the brake caliper to slowly turn it and push the brake fluid back up into the reservoir. So you either use the old brake pad, or like I'm using the flat part of a crowbar, and put it over the caliper, put the C-clamp over it, and slowly tighten it until the caliper is fully recessed back up into its housing. Now after you do that, you can take the C-clamp off and then put your brake pads on, and then it'll fit right over the brake pad housing. But just be careful, don't rush it, and it'll go smoothly. Alright, here you see I've went ahead and I'm doing it properly this time. I've gotten some steel wire, and I'm going to tie it up around the strut, the spring that goes around, the strut up there. And it's not going to hurt anything, but what that does is get that caliper out of your way, so that it's not banging up against the brake lines, or not twisting the brake lines as it sits there and free hangs, or busting up against your new rotor that you'll see me installing in a second. And it's good to just go ahead and get out of the way. Just whenever you hang it, be sure to hang it in a spot that the brake line is not stressed in any way. And if you do that, you'll be good to go. Okay, here you see me again on the other side. I've got the flat part of the crowbar, and I'm putting it up against the brake caliper, and I'm going to take that C-clamp, and I'm going to flip it around here in a second, but I'm going to take that C-clamp and I'm going to slowly start compressing it to where it'll push those calipers. Some brake lines, some of the older brake styles have one caliper in it. This one's got dual calipers, so there's two pieces. So you got to evenly press both rings at the same time. If you don't, you run the risk of damaging the assembly. So with the reservoir uncapped, you want to get the flat piece over both calipers evenly, or caliper rings evenly, and then slowly tighten it. As you see me right now, I'm tightening it up against to make sure it gets snug, and then slowly tighten it, like a half a turn every 2 or 3 seconds, just enough to get it. And then it won't take long, just a minute at most, to get it back up and recessed back up in its housing. But if you do it too fast, you run the risk of busting the brake lines, and especially if you don't remove that cap on the reservoir, you really run the risk of busting your brake lines. And especially the older the car gets, the more risk you have of damaging the brake lines when you do this. So just be careful. You see me here, I'm taking every precaution, trying to make sure I've got the crowbar as flat as possible. And a lot of times I've used the old brake pad. It works just as good. Put the old brake pad up against the caliper, and then tighten the C-clamp down just like I'm doing over the crowbar. Just the key is to take it slow and don't get in a hurry, because if you get in a hurry, you're liable to cause some damage. Even on days like today it was hot, and I wanted to go faster, but it's just key to take it slow. So you see how slowly I'm turning right there, just enough to where I'm pushing that brake fluid back up into that reservoir through the brake line. I'm reversing the flow that it normally goes. So you just got to be careful that you don't overdo it. And if you do that, take it slow, you have nothing to worry about. Also, a lot of times what I do is I let it sit there for a second and just sit there compressed before I start to really do anything. You see here I'm kind of feeling my way through it, just making sure I've got it as compressed as I can get. And once it's done, it's compressed and the fluid is pushed back up in that reservoir, and you're good to go. But it's important to just take it easy. Alright, here you see me going through and putting the new hardware on. Always use the new clips that come with your brake pads, and any new hardware, use it. Don't reuse your old stuff. And also try to get you some of that brake anti-seize. You find it in little packets at the parts store beside the counter. But it's important to lubricate all that up, and what that does is let those parts move as freely as possible. So you really want to get the clips greased to where the brake pad touches the clips, so that when the caliper compresses it, whenever you put it back on and or hit the brakes, that the brakes slide through those clips as easy as possible. The clips will keep them in the car, but that you want them to slide in and out, so that they work as fast as possible. And part of that is also, once you get it on the car, to make sure that everything is open, nothing's rubbing, that kind of thing. But the first part of that is putting your grease on those clips to make sure that anything that could be hanging up on the brake pad is not hanging up, and they move super free. It makes them hard to handle a little bit, especially for somebody like me who only does it every once in a while. I don't do it in a garage every day, so it makes it a little hard to handle, but it's worth it once you got it on the car. All right, here you see that the brake pads are on the support, and with the caliper fully open, if you've done it properly, then that caliper will just ease right over top of those brake pads. You may have to kind of fiddle with it a little bit, depending on what kind of hardware you got, but it'll just ease right over top of it, and you shouldn't have to force anything. If you get to where you're having to force something, there might be something wrong. So if you've got that caliper all the way open, it should go easy. Especially if you've got the brake pads greased, it should go easy. There shouldn't be any major, having to force something. And if you get to where you're having to force something, check it and recheck it and check it again, because there may be something wrong. So anyway, once you got that over, you see the caliper slid right over top of those new brake pads. Bolt the caliper back on, and it's ready to go. Also, while you got the car up in the air, always hand tighten the lug nuts while it's up. You see I'm using an impact wrench, and that's something that you can use because it's not going to really put a lot of torque on the wheel, but it's nearly impossible to tighten the wheel up while it's up anyway. Just make sure those lug nuts are as tight as you can get them without trying to spin the wheel, so that when you put the weight back on the wheel, you can go ahead and finish retightening them and torque them to where they need to be torqued to. Alright, also one thing whenever you're retightening up the lug nuts is, if you can, really try to get a torque wrench so that you know what you're torquing to. This car happens to be tightened to 100 foot-pounds or pound-feet of torque, but you really want to make sure that you're torquing them to what they should be, especially newer cars with aluminum rims. If you over tighten it, you can warp the rim, you can do all kinds of damage to the wheel that you didn't intentionally do, because you know, if you're like me, if I can pull on it and get it tighter, it's not tight enough. It's only tight whenever I can't do it anymore, and that's not necessarily true with these wheels. They're made to be torqued to a certain foot-pounds or pound-feet of torque, and then that's it. And that way you're not warping the aluminum rims or damaging any of the other hardware that's in there. So get you a torque wrench or borrow a torque wrench from the parts store. They normally loan them out for free. And then make sure that your lug nuts are torqued to the correct specification. Alright guys, thanks for watching. This has been Ecology. Like, share, subscribe. Hopefully this was helpful to you, if somebody out there. I wanted to zoom in more on some of the parts, but frankly it was over 100 degrees this day, and once I got started, all my ideas kind of evaporated with the heat, and I started trying to go as quickly as possible. But hopefully it was helpful. The key is just take your time, don't get in a hurry, and don't try to overdo it. And if you have a question for me, leave it in the comments, and I'll try my best to help you out if I can. One last thing, the rear bolts inside, they torque at 25 foot-pounds of torque. The ones for like the brake caliper and such. So they certainly don't need a whole lot, whereas the lug nuts need 100 foot-pounds. So once again, thanks for watching, and this has been Ecology signing off, and we'll see you next time.